This world has never been fair, especially to the little people who are treated like nothing more than dust. Imagine being me, Sanjaya. In my first life, I died like trash. I spent my entire existence bowing my head, apologizing for mistakes I didn't even commit, and letting others trample on my dignity just for a handful of rice. I was the literal definition of a loser. But fate has a dark sense of humor. I was given a second chance. I was reborn, and this time I refused to be the good guy. I chose to become a feared villain rather than an honest man starving to death. The story begins in a cramped, suffocating restaurant kitchen. There I was, Sanjaya, standing in a filthy waiter's uniform. In my previous life, this was the exact spot where I was beaten by a group of wealthy punks because I accidentally spilled a drop of sauce on their expensive shoes. Back then, I knelt, begging for forgiveness while crying, but now, as soon as one of them raised his hand to slap my face, I didn't just stand there. I no longer saw them as masters to be worshipped. They were just arrogant piles of flesh. I caught his hand in one swift motion and drove the fork I was holding straight into the back of his hand without a second thought. That scream of agony was like music to my ears. That was the moment the old Sanjaya died. I was no longer afraid of the police. I was no longer afraid of the law, because I knew the law was just a toy for those with power, and if I wanted to survive, I had to become the one holding the power. I walked out of that restaurant with a steady gaze, leaving chaos in my wake. I knew my path from here on would be soaked in blood, but I made a vow. I'd rather be covered in blood than be the one begging for my life. My first step started in the dark alleys of this city, where the law of the jungle truly applies. I began to enter the underworld, a place I used to look at from a distance with nothing but fear. I started from the very bottom, becoming the most ruthless debt collector the streets had ever seen. People wondered where this sudden courage came from. They didn't know I had already felt the cold touch of death, so what else was there to fear in this world? Every time someone tried to resist, I crushed them completely. Not because I hated them, but because I wanted to send a message. Sanjaya is no longer a target. Slowly but surely, my name began to be whispered in the streets. From a lowly waiter, I started gathering people who shared my fate, the oppressed, those hungry for revenge. I built my own army. I taught them one thing: never show sympathy to your enemy, because your enemy will never do the same for you. My strategy was always clean and lethal. I knew when to strike and when to pull the strings of my opponent's emotions. I used the memories of my past life to take down illegal business rivals one by one before they even realized I was there. The conflict reached its peak when I had to face the big boss who controlled the eastern side of the city. In my past life, he was the reason my family was destroyed. Back then, I could only watch from afar as my home was burned to the ground, crying helplessly. Now I stood right at the doorstep of his luxury mansion, not as a beggar, but as an executioner. He tried to bribe me with money, with women, even with power, but he didn't understand one simple thing: I didn't need his handouts. I was going to take everything, including his life. That night, under a heavy downpour, I stood over the bodies of his guards. I looked into his eyes and saw pure terror. That was the same look I used to see in the mirror. Seeing that fear in the eyes of someone who once thought he was a god was a satisfaction that no amount of money could buy. I didn't kill him quickly. I wanted him to feel every second of his empire's collapse. I stripped him of all his assets, exposed all his dirty secrets, and let him watch the world he built crumble in a single night. Now the Sanjaya who was once a loser is gone. Today I sit in the highest chair of this underworld. Every step I take is followed by guards. Every word I speak is law. I am not a hero. I am the villain you hate in the news, but I am the only one being honest with myself. I no longer care for morality if it only makes me a slave. In this cruel world, if you don't want to be the prey, you have to become the number one predator. I used to think life was about searching for happiness. I was wrong. Life is about power and respect, and if I have to burn this entire world down to get that respect, then let it burn. I will never back down again, from a despised waiter to an untouchable underworld king. this isn't just a story of a comeback. It is a reminder that even a sheep can become a wolf once it has had enough of the pain. Now, every time I pass the restaurant where I used to work, I crack a thin smile. People still bow to me, but the reason has changed. They used to bow out of pity and disgust. Now they bow out of fear, and honestly, I like their fear much better, because in this world, fear is the only thing that's truly honest. My name is Sanjaya, and my game has just begun. I don't need forgiveness, and I certainly don't need love. I just need the world to know one thing. I'm back, and I will never lose again. That was the insane journey of Sanjaya, a tale of how pain can turn a person into the most feared monster. Do you think Sanjaya's decision to become a villain was right? Or should he have stayed a good person despite the constant oppression? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to follow the development of this story, because after this, the opponents Sanjaya faces won't just be ordinary men, but shadows much darker than anything he's ever seen. See you in the next episode.